The attic air hung heavy with the scent of forgotten memories, a musty blend of mildew and dust that clung to every surface. Lena pressed her sleeve against her nose, fighting back a sneeze as she tugged a weathered cardboard box onto the creaking floorboards. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows across the cluttered space. It was a crisp Saturday morning, 6 months after her grandmother's passing. Lena had finally mustered the courage to tackle the daunting task of cleaning out the old woman's attic. Each box seemed to hold a lifetime of secrets, waiting to be unearthed. Most of what she found was predictable. Stacks of yellowed newspapers, their headlines faded reminders of long-past events. Broken lamps with tarnished bases sat nestled among tangles of colorful knitting yarn. But as Lena reached the bottom of one particularly dusty box, her fingers brushed against something that made her pause. A Polaroid photograph. The edges were curled, the image slightly faded by time. But it wasn't the age of the photo that caused Lena's breath to catch in her throat. It was the subject staring back at her from the glossy surface, herself. Lena's eyes widened as she studied the image. There she stood, unmistakably her, in front of her grandmother's house. Her hair was a touch shorter, but everything else, the shape of her face, the curve of her nose, was exactly as she knew it to be. What unsettled her most, however, was the smile plastered across her face. It was wide, almost unnaturally so, stretching from ear to ear in a way that seemed forced. The thing was, Lena had no recollection of this photo ever being taken. She sank to the floor, the rough wood grain biting into her legs as she stared at the image. That smile. It wasn't quite fake, but there was something off about it. As if someone had instructed her to smile, and she had overcompensated, pushing the expression to its limits. With trembling fingers, Lena flipped the Polaroid over. The back was blank, no writing, no date, just smooth cardboard offering no clues to its origin. Shaking her head, she slipped the photo into her hoodie pocket and returned to her cleaning. Yet, as the day wore on, she found her hand drifting to that pocket again and again. The weight of the photograph seemed to grow, pressing against her like an unseen presence. That night, as Lena prepared for bed, she placed the Polaroid on her nightstand. "It's nothing," she murmured to herself, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in her stomach. "Just an old photo I don't remember. That's all." But when morning light crept through her curtains, Lena's eyes flew open with a jolt of alarm. Something was different. The photo was still there, her face still smiling up at her. But now, her head was tilted, just slightly, as if she had leaned closer to the camera in the split second before the shutter clicked. Lena stared at it for a long time, her heart pounding an uneven rhythm against her ribs. She compared it obsessively to the image she remembered from the day before. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe the angle of the light was playing tricks on her eyes. As she dressed for the day, a heavy feeling gnawed at her insides. She found herself glancing at the photo every few minutes, half expecting to catch it in the act of changing. By the third morning, Lena's doubts evaporated like mist in sunlight. The change in the Polaroid was undeniable. This time her smile had grown even wider, teeth now visible between parted lips. Her eyes seemed to glint strangely, as if reflecting a light source that didn't exist in the real world. Lena's hands shook as she held the photograph. She flipped it over again, desperately searching for some explanation written on its blank surface. Finding nothing, she let out a strangled laugh, telling herself it had to be an elaborate prank. Someone was messing with her. They had to be. That night, she stuffed the photo deep into her sock drawer, burying it beneath layers of fabric. But when she woke, her blood ran cold. The Polaroid was back on the nightstand, face up and waiting. Sleep became elusive, stolen in fitful bursts between long hours of staring at the ceiling. Every night, Lena would turn the photo face down, sometimes hiding it in drawers or closets. Every morning, it reappeared, always upright, always watching. And always, that smile stretched further. The tilt of her head leaned closer. By the end of the week, the figure in the photo was no longer simply standing. She had taken a step forward, closer to the camera, closer to Lena. The smile now split her face in a way that defied human anatomy, the corners reaching too far across her cheeks. The eyes, they weren't Lena's anymore. They were darker, filled with a hunger that made her skin crawl. Lena stopped showing the photo to anyone. Her friends had already commented on the dark circles under her eyes, the distracted way she spoke. How could she possibly explain that a photograph was changing itself, that it seemed to be coming alive? Instead, she carried it everywhere, checking it constantly, watching, waiting, dreading what she might see next. Soon, other oddities began to creep into Lena's world. Shadows in her apartment that didn't match the objects casting them. A reflection in the microwave that continued smiling after she had turned away. Her phone screen glitching, freezing on images of her own face. Expressions she was certain she had never made. At night, she'd jolt awake to a faint but distinct sound. Click, like a camera shutter being pressed over and over again in the darkness. The photo never left her nightstand now. Every morning her doppelganger in the picture inched closer, closer, closer to the edge of the frame. Until one morning, Lena realized something that turned her blood to ice water in her veins. The background of the photo had changed. The house behind her was no longer her grandmother's quaint cottage. It was her own apartment building, unmistakable in its stark modernity. Terror clawed at Lena's throat. She had to destroy it. Had to end this nightmare before it went any further. With shaking hands, she gripped the edges of the Polaroid and tore it in half. But before her eyes, the pieces melted back together, leaving the image whole and unmarred. Frantic now, she struck a match and held the flame to one corner. The fire flickered, danced, and then snuffed out as if it had never existed. The photo remained pristine, mocking her efforts. Heart racing, Lena locked the Polaroid in a metal box and shoved it under her bed. That night, her dreams were a twisted maze of corridors. She found herself standing in her own doorway, smiling that too wide smile. Her own voice whispered in her ear, low and distorted, "Smile for the camera." When she jerked awake, drenched in cold sweat, the photo was back on her nightstand. Now her reflection was mere inches from the frame, as if pressing against an invisible barrier, desperate to break free. By then, Lena was unraveling. She covered every mirror in her apartment with sheets, turned every screen face down. But deep down, she knew it didn't matter. She could feel it. The version of herself trapped in that photograph. Watching, waiting, hungry. At 3:15 a.m., the shutter's sound jolted her from uneasy sleep. But this time it didn't stop. Click, click, click. A rapid-fire assault of invisible cameras capturing moments that shouldn't exist. Lena's hand fumbled for the light switch. As warm light flooded the room, her eyes locked onto her nightstand. The Polaroid was gone. It was on her pillow. With trembling fingers, she picked it up. The smiling figure was no longer in the background. She was right at the edge of the frame, one hand pressed against it as if it were a pane of glass. Her eyes burned with an inhuman light. That smile. It was too wide, too sharp, a predator's grin barely contained by human features. The last thing Lena saw before the lights went out was her own reflection, stepping out of the photograph, reaching for her with hands that should not exist outside of glossy paper and chemical development. The next morning, worried friends came knocking. No answer. They found her apartment unlocked, everything inside looking almost normal. Almost. The nightstand was empty. The bed was neatly made, as if no one had slept in it for days. On the pillow lay a single Polaroid. It showed Lena sitting on the edge of the bed, smiling that wide, unnatural smile, and in the background, barely visible, but unmistakable, someone else's hand rested on her shoulder. They say a photograph captures a memory, but some photos don't just capture, they take. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that story. If you did, please subscribe DarkWhisper AI. Leave a comment. The next episode will be up soon, don't miss. Goodbye.